The grand opening banner was the first thing I saw that morning across the water. 20-foot vinyl, white background, red letters. Grand opening Lakeside Resort, members only. They had hung it overnight, on a lake my family had owned since 1962. I was on my dock at 7:14, same as every morning for 22 years. Coffee on the cleat, line in the water, then I heard the boots. 2 HOA Lake Patrol security guards came down my dock in formation. Behind them, Linda Vance, president of our homeowners association, in a white blazer with a corsage pinned to the lapel, as if she were attending her own wedding. She did not say good morning.
Sir, you need to vacate this dock immediately. You are trespassing on a community amenity.
The community amenity in question was a lake my father had bought from a logging company before Linda Vance was born, but she did not know that yet. I did not turn around. I reeled my line in a foot. The bobber dipped, came back up. I sipped my coffee. Vacate it for what, Linda? This is club property now. The Lakeside Resort opens to members in 45 minutes. She held a laminated card out toward my shoulder. The guard behind her held a clipboard with my name already written on it. The column next to it marked non-member in red ink. Lake Club membership application, Linda said. $4,800 initiation, $600 a month. Sign it and you can stay. Don't sign it and you leave. The younger guard, 25 maybe, the kind of man who had been waiting his whole life for someone to hand him a uniform, stepped forward and photographed my tackle box. For the incident report, he said. His partner crouched at the far end of the dock and ran a thumb along the brass cleat my father had set in the cedar in 1973. This'll be repainted to match the resort palette by Friday. I set my coffee down on the boards. I did not stand up. I watched the bobber instead. The water was still glass at that hour, the way my father had always said a lake should look like something that was old and patient and not at all in a hurry. Across the water, the first residents were beginning to filter in. Couples in pastel polos, 2 children on rented kayaks tied at the new boardwalk. A florist's van was unloading orchid arrangements. A 4-piece string quartet was tuning beside the cabanas. A man in a chef's coat carried a tray of champagne flutes past a sign that read, "Private, Event, Lakeside Community Only." Linda's son Brent stood at the resort entrance in a polo 2 sizes too tight, gesturing at a vendor's truck with the air of a man directing traffic at his own coronation. 400 people, Linda had told the local paper. 400 residents of Lakeside Estates, expected for the grand opening of their new community amenity. 400 witnesses. She had always mistaken my silence for compliance. For 3 years, she had mistaken my silence for permission. And for 3 years, I had let her because my father had died in the middle of this fight. And grief makes a man patient in ways that look, from the outside, like surrender. That patience had run out at 7:14 this morning. Mr. Rayburn. Linda said my name, the way a teacher says the name of a parent she is about to lecture. I don't care what you think you own. The community has voted. I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Something older than that. My father had told me once, in this exact spot, that the loudest man in any fight was almost always the one who had the least to back it up. Linda Vance was very loud this morning. She had no idea every nail in that resort across the water already legally belonged to me. She had just invited 400 witnesses to her own grand opening. I reeled in my line slowly, hand over hand. I folded the laminated application in half. I slid it into the back pocket of my jeans. I picked up my tackle box. I picked up my coffee. I stood, looked at Linda Vance once long enough for her to notice I was not afraid of her, and walked off my own dock without saying another word. The younger guard followed me 3 steps, and then thought better of it. Linda called after me, her voice climbing into the morning air. "We have your name, Mr. Rayburn. You'll be hearing from us by tomorrow." I kept walking. At the top of the slope, near the gate to my driveway, Mrs. Henderson was standing in her gardening hat, a hand at her throat. 78 years old. She had lived next door since 1989. She had been the one who, in 1994, had warned my father about the first HOA board that came sniffing at our cove, with a survey crew and a smile. She had been at his funeral 2 years ago. She had brought a pie. She had told me, in the receiving line, "They'll come back for the lake one day, Tom. Don't let them." I had told her I wouldn't. I had been letting them for 3 years. She put a small hand on my arm. "Tom," her voice was low, careful, like she had been waiting all morning for the chance to ask. "The deed. The deed your daddy showed me in '94. You still have it, right?" I told her I still had it. I told her I still had every page. She closed her eyes for a moment and nodded once, like a woman who had just heard that the cavalry was on its way and had only needed to know it was real. Behind us, across the lake, Linda's voice rose into a microphone, and the first cheer went up at the resort entrance. The grand opening had started 43 minutes early. I walked the rest of the way to my house, and I did not look back. I closed the front door behind me. I stood in the entryway for a long moment with my tackle box still in my hand, listening to the muffled sound of a microphone 300 yards away, announcing my own lake as theirs. Then I set the box down and walked to my father's study. That night, for the first time in 20 years, I opened the safe. The safe was behind a panel in my father's study, in a wall my grandfather had finished himself in 1965. I had not opened it since the week of his funeral. The combination was the date my parents got married. Some things a man does not forget, even when he wishes he could. Inside, on top of everything else, was a manila envelope, the color of weak tea. On the front, in my father's handwriting in blue ballpoint pen, Reburn Lake original deed, plat, and tax records, do not lose. I sat in his reading chair with the envelope on my knee for a long time before I opened it. My father bought 60 acres and a lake from the Cascade Timber Company in the spring of 1962. He paid $11,000 in cash from 12 years of rail yard wages. The lake had no name on the county map. The deed listed the property as a single parcel house, 60 acres, lake bed, shoreline, and a 30-foot perimeter all the way around the water. The plat map was hand-drawn by a county surveyor and notarized. It looked like a child's drawing of a pond. It was also the only thing that mattered. He built our house in 1964. He set the brass cleats in the cedar dock in 1973. He paid the property tax on the lake every year from 1962 until he died in February of 2021. Every bill came addressed to him. Every bill named the same parcel number. The suburb arrived in the late 1980s. Lakeside Estates was built in 3 phases on a soybean farm to the east, and the HOA was incorporated in 1991. Mrs. Henderson kept the founding bylaws in a shoebox under her bed, and I had a copy. Those bylaws declared 11 specific common elements: clubhouse, 2 tennis courts, 3 pocket parks, walking trail, 4 entry gates, pool, maintenance shed. The lake was not on the list. The lake had never been on the list. That should have been the end of the story. It had not been the end, because Linda Vance had been on the HOA board since 2014, president since 2018, and Linda Vance treated paperwork the way some men treat a poker tell, as something to bluff past on the way to a bigger pot. For 3 boards running, the lake had been their white whale. First a community dock sharing arrangement, then a shared kayak storage agreement, then, in 2019, a non-binding resolution declaring the lake a recognized community amenity of historical and recreational importance. A non-binding resolution is, in plain English, a piece of paper that does not bind anyone to anything. It is the legal equivalent of a child closing his eyes and declaring himself invisible. But Linda had begun to cite it. Linda had begun to cite it everywhere. In 2020, while my father was dying, her board had filed permits with the county for resort improvements on parcel adjacent to Community Lake. Adjacent. Not on. Adjacent. The county clerk had stamped the permits without checking the deed underneath them, because a permit application is not a title search. The first concrete was poured in the spring of 2022. I had been letting them do it. That is the part of the story I do not enjoy telling. My father had died mid-sentence on the phone with our attorney about the Linda problem. I had buried him on a cold morning. I had buried, with him, the energy to keep fighting strangers for a piece of water that already had our family name on it. I had paid 3 years of small fines, quietly a kayak rack visible from the road, a fishing line described as a public hazard, a $40 penalty for non-compliant signage on a private property marker my grandfather had set in 1968. I had paid them all. I had told myself it was easier. Grief makes a man patient in ways that look, from the outside, like surrender. Linda had read that surrender as permission, and she had built a $5 million resort on it. 3 days after the grand opening, Mrs. Henderson came to my door with a thumb drive in her hand. She had been at a board meeting 11 months earlier, in the back row, knitting. She had been knitting at HOA meetings since 1992. The board had stopped noticing her years ago. She had set her phone face down on her purse, out of habit, and her phone had been recording. I didn't even know I had it until last Tuesday, she said on my porch. Looking for a recipe, dates got mixed up. She pressed play. There was the rustle of a meeting called to order. There was Linda's voice, brisk and presidential. Let's move to the lake parcel discussion. There was Dale Whitlock clearing his throat. Dale was the board's volunteer attorney, retired, status-hungry, the kind of retired man who cited his own opinion letters as case law. And then there was Linda Vance, in her own voice, on a recording the woman in front of me had not known she'd made. Rayburn's deed might predate us. Dale says, we have a path. We build, we use, we vote. By the time it gets to a judge, the resort is a fact. Assent in the room. 3 or 4 board members agreed audibly. One, Karen Liu, who I would later learn had been the only board member to vote no on every lake motion for 2 years, said quietly, I want it on the record that I do not agree with this strategy, and was immediately talked over. Mrs. Henderson stopped the recording. She had bright, clear eyes for a woman of 78. Tom, what are you going to do? I sat with the question, looking past her at the lake. In every state in this country, when somebody builds a permanent structure on land that isn't theirs, even if they sincerely believed it was, the structure becomes part of the land, and the landowner keeps it. Lawyers call it the doctrine of fixtures. My father had called it the finder's weeper's rule, because the builder always lost. Linda Vance had just spent $5 million of her neighbor's money building me a resort. She just didn't know it yet. I'm going to let her finish, I told Mrs. Henderson. She blinked. She still has a public ribbon cutting on Friday, I said. She still has vendor contracts on Monday. The more she does, the more she builds. The more she builds, the more she gives me. Mrs. Henderson considered this. Then she did something I did not expect. She smiled a small, sharp 90-degree smile. The smile of a woman who had been waiting a long time for somebody on this street to start fighting back. Your father would have done the same thing. She left the thumb drive on my kitchen table and walked home in the afternoon light. I sat alone with the recording, with the deed envelope, with a county tax bill from 1,962 inches my father's handwriting, and one from 2,024 inches mine. And I made the only decision a son can make when he has finally finished grieving long enough to remember what his father asked of him. I called Marisol Ortega, property attorney in the next county. My father's friend for 30 years. She had sent flowers to his funeral. She picked up on the second ring. Tom, Marisol, I need help. I told her about the resort, the membership card, the grand opening, the dock, the thumb drive. She was quiet, a long moment. Then she said, very softly, in the tone of a woman trying not to laugh, Tom, you own everything they nailed down. That sentence, that one sentence, in Marisol's voice, was about to cost Linda Vance everything she had ever taken from this neighborhood, and she still did not know it. On Friday, she would stand in front of 400 people with a corsage on her lapel and declare my lake theirs, forever. I hung up the phone. I sat in my father's reading chair with the deed envelope on my knee, and for the first time since his funeral, I let myself smile. They came to my door 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning at 9 to 10. Linda, in the same white blazer, the corsage gone, replaced by a small enamel sailboat pin. Dale Whitlock, behind her in a charcoal suit, holding a manila folder against his chest. Brent in the G-Wagon at the curb, engine running, scrolling on his phone. I let them stand on the step 1 beat longer than was comfortable, then stepped aside. I put them at the kitchen table on purpose. The window looks out on the lake. I wanted to see the resort on their faces if either of them looked. Dale opened the folder. Linda did the talking. Tom. She used my first name like she was doing me a favor. We're hoping we can clear this up today. We don't want it to get any uglier than it has to. Dale slid the first page across. Lake Use Compliance Notice Rayburn. T. Total assessed. $18,000. He read items aloud in the tone a man uses to read a wine list. Failure to register dock with the Lake Club, $2,400. Unauthorized fishing on community amenity, $600 per day for 30 days. Refusal to wear Lake Club identification, $800. Refusal to remit membership initiation, $4,800. I let him finish. I did not pick up the page. That math doesn't add up, Dale. There's a rounding adjustment, Mr. Rayburn. Section 11, subsection D. There isn't a section 11 in the bylaws, Dale. There are 9 sections. He paused for exactly half a second, then kept going, as if I had not spoken. If unpaid in 14 days, the assessment converts to a lien. He slid a second page across, formal letterhead, signature block filled in, only the date line blank. Attached to the home, as is the boards right under the covenants. The lien notice sat between 2 cups of coffee I had not offered them. Linda leaned in, voice softening. We don't want it to come to this, Tom. Nobody does. Just sign the membership form. You can still enjoy your lake, just under community rules. The chef is from Portland. The word "your" came out in audible quotation marks. In the breast pocket of my flannel, my phone had been recording since I opened the door. I let the silence do what silence does to people who use words the way Linda used words. Linda. In the HOA bylaws, Section 4, Declaration of Common Elements, is the lake listed? Dale's eyes moved before his mouth did. A half-second flicker toward Linda. She answered before he could. It's listed in our 2022 board resolution. We codified it. That wasn't what I asked. Section 4 of the bylaws. The 2022 resolution amended the bylaws. A resolution doesn't amend bylaws, Linda. A bylaw amendment does. By a 2/3 vote of the full membership of the association. Did you take a 2/3 vote of the full membership? Her jaw tightened. Dale was looking at the lake out my window now, very intently, as if noticing it for the first time. We had a quorum of the board, Linda said. That's not the same thing. Tom. She tried for warmth and landed closer to teeth. We're not here to argue procedure. We're here to give you a chance to make this right. I nodded slowly, picked up the compliance notice and the lien threat, tapped them gently against the table edge to align them, and slid them back into Dale's folder. I'll respond in writing within 14 days. Dale exhaled. He had been prepared for either a meltdown or a check. A quiet receipt was the one outcome his folder was not built for. They left. The G-Wagon pulled away from the curb. Dale climbed in last, slowly, with the air of a man who had just remembered an old argument he had once lost. I closed the door. I went into the study. I played the recording back. Linda's your lake. Dale's half-second flicker. Linda admitting on tape they had not taken a 2/3 vote of the full membership. 3 clean minutes of evidence, captured on a phone that had been 3 feet from her mouth for half an hour, recorded with her full knowledge that she was a guest in my home, which, in our state, is all the consent the law requires. I made a folder on my computer. I labeled it Lake. The recording went in next to Mrs. Henderson's thumb drive. Next to those, the compliance notice, the lien threat, the deed, the 1,960, 2 plat, 60 years of tax bills, and the founding bylaws that made no mention of a lake. Then I called Marisol. They came to my door this morning. Tell me everything. I told her. The compliance notice, the lien threat, Linda's your lake. Dale's invented Section 11. Linda admitting on tape that the bylaw had never been amended. When I was done, her voice had gone clipped lawyer voice, not friend voice. Tom, listen carefully. Do not pay that fine. Do not respond to the compliance notice until I tell you to. The lien they're threatening, they can file it. We knock it off with a single motion the same week. They are bluffing with paper they don't have the legal foundation to enforce. I figured. I'm filing this week. Quiet title plus fixtures. 2 claims, 1 packet. I want a judge to say it out loud before Linda Vance signs another vendor contract. How long? Until a hearing. 10 days, maybe less. Friday is the public opening. Marisol. A pause. I could hear her smiling. Then file Monday. Let her have her ribbon cutting. Let her put the speech on tape for us. That was my thought. Your father would have liked this part. I know. I hung up. That night, Linda called at 9:15. I let it ring twice. Tom. Just a quick one. We close on the resort vendor contracts Monday morning. Food and beverage, 5-year deal. Spa concessionaire, 7. Events vendor, 10. Big commitments. Once those signatures land, the resort is fully operational. Reversing course gets enormously expensive after that. I just want you to think very carefully about your next move. A rehearsed pause. Don't make this ugly, Tom. I looked at the photograph on my father's desk, him in 1968, standing on the dock he had built, holding me on his shoulder. I was a year old. He was smiling at something past the camera. Linda, I'm not going to make it anything. I hung up. Friday was 3 days away. Word spread fast. By Wednesday afternoon, 3 neighbors had stopped me in the driveway to ask if it was true the HOA had assessed me $18,000 over fishing. By Thursday evening, somebody had told somebody that Linda was trying to take my house. The first knock came at 4:20 Wednesday. A man named Greg Pulaski, 3 doors down, retired postal carrier. In 22 years, he had never been to my house for any reason. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one Linda had sat at, and laid out 4 years of dues statements in chronological order. 2021, 180 a month. 2024, 640. 350% in 3 years, Tom. Every quarter they send a one-pager with line items vague as hell, and Linda stands up at annual meeting and tells us, lake amenity improvements, lake amenity improvements. Nobody ever got to vote on a resort. He looked at me. I want to know if it's true the lake is yours. I told him it was. I told him about 1,962 and the deed, and that the lake had never been on the HOA's books as a common element. I told him I could prove it. Greg sat with that. There are 6 other people on my street who want to talk to you. By Friday morning, the morning of Linda's public opening 8 residents had come through my kitchen. One was a woman named Diane, who had resigned from the HOA Finance Subcommittee because Linda's husband had billed the association $240,000. The prior year for consulting services nobody could describe. One was a young father named Tariq, who had asked at last spring's annual meeting why Brent Vance drew $48,000 a year to chair the Lake Committee, and had been told, in front of the room, that committee compensation is a confidential personnel matter. They were not knocking on my door because of me. They were knocking on my door because somebody had finally said no out loud. And they wanted to know if it was safe to say it too. Mrs. Henderson came by that afternoon with 2 shoeboxes. The first held photographs from her late husband's neighborhood archive. On the bottom of the stack, 3 Polaroids from the summer of 1978. At the Western Cove, my grandfather's hand-painted sign leaning against a cedar post. Private reburn. The second shoebox held 3 documents, each individually wrapped in Ziploc bags like sacred objects. Lakeside Estates HOA Founding Bylaws, 1991. Amended Bylaws, 2004. Amended Bylaws, 2017. She had been keeping them under her bed for 33 years. I read all 3 that evening. None of them, not one, listed the lake as a common element. That same evening, I sat down with the thumb drive and listened to the full recording, end to end, 47 minutes. Linda saying Rayburn's deed might predate us. Dale agreeing. 3 board members agreeing. Karen Lou objecting twice, on the record, and being talked over both times. At minute 31, Linda's voice clear on the tape. We're going to move $280,000 from the operating reserve into the lake amenity line item this quarter. Nobody on the membership is going to read the quarterly footnotes. They never do. I noted the timestamp. Saturday morning, 24 hours after Linda's ribbon cutting, a man named Eduardo Reyes parked in my driveway. Former subcontractor on the resort build, fired 6 weeks earlier for asking the wrong questions about funding. Angry, organized. He brought a flash drive of his own. 43 invoices, totaling $5,200,000, paid out of an HOA account labeled, in the memo line on every single one, Lake Amenity Improvement Capital Reserve. $5.2 million of resident dues, paid to contractors, to build a resort, on land they did not own. I called Marisol that night. I have everything. I sent the dues statements, the Polaroids, the bylaws, the 47-minute recording, the invoices, and Linda's Your Lake tape from Tuesday. She was quiet on the line for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had a quality I had not heard in it before, something close to reverence. Tom, this is not a lawsuit. This is 3. Talk to me. Phase 1. Quiet title plus fixtures. The deed case. We file Monday. Hearing in 10 days, you become the legal owner of every piece of timber and concrete on that lake. That's the case you came to me with. Right. Phase 2. A separate civil action by you against the HOA for trespass and conversion, for everything they did before we filed. That one we file after we win Phase 1. And Phase 3? Phase 3 isn't yours, Tom. Phase 3 is what the State Attorney General's office is going to do to Linda and Dale and Brent when somebody hands them this thumb drive. That one we don't file. We just make sure it lands on the right desk. I sat with that. Send me the draft of Phase 1 tonight. I want it filed Monday at 9 a.m. You don't want to move sooner? She's still signing vendor contracts. No. Monday is fine. Let her finish. Tom. Marisol. The more she does, the more she gives me. A long pause. Your father would be unbearable right now. I know. At 11 that night, Marisol emailed me the draft filing. I opened it on my father's computer in his study. The subject line read, Rayburn v. Lakeside OA Phase 1. There would be 3 phases. Linda Vance only knew about 0. The chainsaws started at 8:03 on Saturday morning. I had been awake since 6. Coffee on the porch. 4 exterior cameras already streaming to cloud backup. My father had installed the system in 2019, after Linda's board started sending people to verify dock compliance without notice. He had been building the evidence vault for 2 years before he died. A flatbed truck rolled up the access easement at 8:01. 2 men in orange vests. A skid steer on a trailer. A foreman in a polo with a clipboard. Behind them on foot, Brent Vance, in a tight polo, holding a single sheet of paper like a warrant. I walked down to meet them at the head of the dock. The foreman tried for polite. Good morning. We're here for the dock removal. Whose dock? He blinked. He glanced at Brent. Brent stepped forward. It's on the work order, Rayburn. Non-compliant private dock structure. Replace with Lake Club standard platform by end of day. He held it out. I took it. Lakeside Resort Improvements, LLC, HOA authorization, Linda Vance. Property described as the Eastern Shore dock structure, parcel adjacent to Community Lake. Adjacent. There was that word again. I handed it back to the foreman. I did not look at Brent. Sir, I'm the property owner. This dock is on my parcel. I do not authorize this work. The foreman looked at Brent. Brent's face flickered for half a second. Don't listen to him. He's a holdout. The HOA owns the lake. Cut it. The foreman hesitated. Sir, I said, to the foreman, I have the deed in the house. I can show you in 90 seconds. If you cut a single board, you are personally liable for trespass and destruction of property. Your company is liable. Your bond carrier is liable, not the HOA. You. The foreman set his clipboard on the trailer. Brent's voice climbed. He's bluffing. Cut it. The younger man in a vest started his saw. The first cedar plank hit the water at 8:06. I had my phone out by then, recording. So were 3 cameras. I dialed 911 with my thumb without taking the phone down. I need a deputy at 24 Rayburn Lake Road. A crew is destroying property at my house. They claim HOA authorization. I'm the property owner. They are not stopping. The dispatcher said 18 minutes. The saw kept going. The brass cleat my father had set in 1973 came up with a chunk of cedar around it, bounced off the boards, and dropped into the water. I watched it sink. I did not move from the head of the dock. Brent was filming me on his phone now, narrating. This is the homeowner refusing to comply. This is what obstruction looks like. He was, indeed, documenting everything. I let him. The deputies arrived in 17 minutes. Sergeant Diaz and a younger deputy. They got out, took in the truck, the skid steer, the half-destroyed dock, a contractor crew mid-saw, a homeowner holding a phone, and Brent Vance gesturing at all of it. Diaz held up a hand. The saws went quiet. Everybody stop. Right now. I gave her the deed. The 1,962 plat, the 2024 tax bill. I played her 2 minutes of Linda's Your Lake recording from Tuesday. She read the deed once. Then again. She looked at Brent. Son, who told you this was HOA property? My mother, Linda Vance. She's the HOA president. She has documentation. Show me. Brent fumbled with his phone. Pulled up the 2019 non-binding resolution. Diaz read it. Handed his phone back with the same expression she might have used handing back a child's drawing. This is a non-binding resolution, son. It says the ESA. Now. And get this crew off the property. Brent called Linda. She did not pick up. He called her 3 more times in 5 minutes. She did not pick up any of them. I would learn later that Linda had been with the spa concessionaire, finalizing the 7-year contract she had warned me about. She had silenced her phone. She did not pick up Brent. She did not pick up Sergeant Diaz. She did not pick up her own board secretary, who was being copied on the deputy's reports in real time. By 9:30, Diaz had filed an on-scene incident report. The crew had been instructed to vacate. Brent had been informed, on the record, that any further action without the deed holder's written permission would result in trespass charges. The skid steer was rolling back down the easement by 10. The dock was half gone. I stood at what was left. Cedar planks my father had laid in 1973 floating across the cove. The brass cleat somewhere on the bottom. I did not pick anything up. I left it where it was. I wanted it on camera. I wanted a judge to see what $5 million of resident dues had paid to destroy. I called Marisol. "We're filing today," she said. "It's Saturday. I have the clerk on speed dial. She'll meet me at the courthouse in an hour. We're filing today, Tom." She filed at 11:47. 2 motions, 1 packet. Quiet title and fixture doctrine. 86 pages. The deed on page 3. A process server delivered the courtesy copy to the Lakeside Resort at 4:15 into Linda's hands in the resort lobby. She signed for it. She laughed when she read the cover sheet. She told the residents standing there, "He thinks he can stop us." The resort opens to the public on Friday. She did not read past page 2. That night, I sat on what was left of the dock as the sun went down. The water was very still. 2 ducks landed in the cove and did not seem to notice the cedar floating around them. My father had taught me how to set a brass cleat. He had taught me how to read a deed. He had taught me that the loudest man in any fight was almost always the one with the least to back it up. I had been letting Linda be loud for 3 years. Friday was coming. Friday was her public opening. Friday was when I would be in the front row, holding a copy of the deed. Friday came clear and bright, the kind of afternoon Linda Vance had probably been praying for since she ordered the orchids. The resort's official public ribbon cutting was set for 2 p.m. on the front lawn of the new clubhouse, a building that sat, according to a deed she had not bothered to read, on the southwest corner of my property. By 1:30 there were 200 people on folding chairs, 2 news vans, the mayor in a blue blazer, the string quartet from grand opening day, back for an encore. Linda was in a different white blazer, new corsage. She moved through the crowd shaking hands the way a woman shakes hands when she has already pictured the photograph. I sat in the back row in a navy jacket and old jeans. Marisol 2 seats away with a leather folder on her lap. Mrs. Henderson in a pale yellow cardigan directly in front of us. Under my chair, in a plain manila folder, I had 2 pages. The first page of the 1962 deed. The first page of the quiet title filing, stamped by the county clerk at 11:47 a.m. the previous Saturday. I had not needed more than that. Linda climbed the temporary stage at 2:03. She tapped the microphone. She smiled. Friends, neighbors, family. She paused for the small chuckle she knew she would get. 6 years ago, I told this board that Lakeside Estates deserved more than tennis courts and a pool. I said we deserved a destination. A legacy. The mayor nodded sagely. And today, after thousands of hours of work and the trust of every single resident in this community, we are standing on that legacy. Applause. She raised a hand. This resort, this community, this lake, they are ours. Forever. No one will ever take this from us. The applause came back louder. Beside me, Marisol's left hand was on her phone, recording. So were 3 of mine, in 3 different pockets. So was the CBS affiliate's camera in front of the stage. So were probably 40 other phones. I would, 8 days later, have 11 separate audio captures of that sentence. Linda gave a 12-minute speech. She thanked the board. She thanked Dale Whitlock, who waved from the front row. She thanked Brent for Lake Committee leadership, and Brent stood and saluted the crowd like a man receiving an award. She did not thank her husband for the $240,000 in consulting fees, but she did thank the dedicated vendors who made this dream a reality. Their 7-year and 10-year contracts were stacked in a binder on a side table next to her, signed Monday, dry as old paper now. She announced membership applications were being processed at the welcome desk. She announced the resort would open to public bookings on August 15th. She announced that, in honor of the community's investment, the entire shoreline would be rededicated as Lakeside Estates Community Waterfront, a name she had clearly workshopped with signage installed by end of next month. She did not look at me once. I do not think she knew I was there. The mayor cut the ribbon at 2:21. The string quartet started up. People stood to circulate. That was when the master of ceremonies, a man hired from a local event company, stepped back to the microphone. Before we adjourn, the board has asked if any of our longtime residents would like to come up and share a memory of this community. We have a few minutes. A pause. In a row near the front, a woman started to stand, and then thought better of it. Marisol's hand brushed my elbow. I stood. The room did not turn all at once. It turned the way a room turns when a stranger stands up unexpectedly, a head here, a head there, then a whisper, then a whole field of heads. By the time I had walked 4 rows down the aisle, 200 people were looking at me. By the time I reached the stage, Linda had seen me. I watched her face try to find the right expression. She had practiced many expressions. She had not practiced this one. She tried, finally, for a tight performative smile, the smile a woman gives when she expects a public meltdown she can later use as a viral clip. She nodded at the MC. The MC stepped aside. I took the microphone. I saw Greg Pulaski in the third row, Diane 2 seats over, Tariq with his daughter on his lap near the aisle, Karen Liu, the board member from the recording, sitting alone in a row by herself, holding a copy of the agenda very tightly. 400 witnesses. I cleared my throat once. I just wanted to thank Linda, I said, for building me a beautiful resort. The first few seconds, the audience laughed. They thought it was a joke, a friendly toast. I let the laugh breathe. I'll see all of you in court on Tuesday. I set the microphone back in its stand. I walked off the stage. I walked back up the aisle, picked up my manila folder from under my chair, took Marisol's elbow, took Mrs. Henderson's hand on the way past, and we walked out of the tent into the bright Friday afternoon without saying anything else. Behind us, on the stage, Linda Vance was still smiling. She brought the microphone back to her mouth and said, with a laugh that was just a hair too high, "He's confused, that's HOA property." And then she stopped. Because, in the front row, Dale Whitlock had finally opened the 86-page packet that had been delivered to the resort lobby the previous Saturday, the packet Linda had laughed at and signed for and never read. And Dale Whitlock had just read past page 2. Mrs. Henderson told me later, it was the face of a man watching a building collapse in slow motion and realizing, halfway down, that he had been the one to pull the first brick. Marisol drove me home. We did not talk for the first 10 minutes. Then she glanced at me. Tuesday morning, courtroom 4B, Judge Patricia Alvarez. She has a reputation for hating land grab cases. Granted summary judgment from the bench in 11 minutes once, against a developer trying to absorb a family farm. 11 minutes is fast. 11 minutes is fast, Tom. She dropped me at my driveway. She told me to wear a suit, to bring the original deed in a sealed envelope and the 1,962 plat in a sealed tube, and not to open either until she said. I told her I would. I stood at my mailbox for a minute, watching the late afternoon light hit the lake. Tuesday morning was 3 days away. Linda still hadn't slept. I had no way of knowing that for certain. But I knew it was true. Courtroom 4B was on the 3rd floor of the Polk County Courthouse, small and wood-paneled. Marisol and I sat at the plaintiff's table by 8:45. The deed was in a sealed envelope between us. The 1,962 plat was in a long cardboard tube. The defense came in at 9:03. Dale Whitlock first, in a dark gray suit. He set a thin folder on the defense table and did not look at us. Behind him, Linda Vance, in a beige suit, and a single strand of pearls, no corsage. She had not slept in 3 days. The makeup did not hide it. Behind her, 3 board members, and behind them, Brent. Karen Liu was not at the defense table. She was in the gallery, front row, alone. The rest of the gallery filled by 9:15. Greg Pulaski with his wife, Diane, Tariq, Mrs. Henderson in the same yellow cardigan, Eduardo Reyes with a manila folder of his own. 28 residents in all, plus 2 local reporters. Judge Patricia Alvarez took the bench at 9:30, small, 50s, reading glasses on a chain. This is Rayburn versus Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. Quiet title and fixtures. Mr. Whitlock for the association? Yes, Your Honor. Miss Ortega, opening. Marisol stood at the table. She did not walk to a podium. Your Honor, this is a deed case and a fixtures case, not a bylaws case, not an amenities case. My client, Thomas Rayburn, holds a recorded deed dated April of 1962 to the parcel locally known as Rayburn Lake. The deed is in this envelope. The original 1,962 plat is in this tube. Both notarized, both continuously on file with the Polk County Recorder for 62 years. She handed the envelope and the tube to the bailiff. The defendant has spent approximately $5.2 million of resident funds constructing a resort on my client's parcel, under the theory that a 2019 non-binding resolution described the parcel as adjacent to a community lake. The parcel is not adjacent. The parcel is the lake. She sat down. 3 minutes. Judge Alvarez slid the deed out of the envelope and read. The courtroom was the kind of silent that has its own pressure. I heard the ventilation. I heard Linda swallow. 90 seconds. The judge lifted her head. Mr. Whitlock. Dale stood. Counsel. Do you contest the authenticity of this deed? His mouth opened. It hung open a fraction of a second before he found words. We do not contest authenticity, Your Honor. We argue the community has used the lake openly and continuously for a period sufficient to... Mr. Whitlock. He stopped. Did your client build a 30,000 square foot resort on this parcel? A pause. Yes, Your Honor. Then sit down. He sat down. I want to tell you what the room looked like in the next 10 seconds. Because the next 10 seconds were the climax of this whole story. Linda Vance's face went the color of old paper. It was not the kind of pale that comes from shock. It was the kind of pale that comes from a person watching every promise she had ever made to herself about her own intelligence collapse at the same time. Dale did not look up from the table. He folded his hands on top of his folder and did not move them again for the rest of the hearing. Brent made a sound in the back of his throat. It was not a word. He stood, pushed past the row of board members behind him, and walked out. The door at the back of the gallery banged shut. Nobody turned. Mrs. Henderson, in the third row, put her hand to her mouth and closed her eyes. Greg Pulaski did the math. I watched him do it. 8 residents had been through my kitchen the week before, asking where their dues had gone. Greg's face, in that moment, was the face of a man realizing he was holding the answer. Karen Lou, alone in the front row, leaned across the rail and said something quietly to Marisol. Marisol turned her head an inch. Karen handed her a folded piece of paper. Marisol slid it under our table. Judge Alvarez tapped her glasses on the bench. Miss Ortega, walk me through the rest. Marisol stood. She did it in 4 pieces. She held to Joe, to Joe, to Joace, to Joe, to Joe, to Joe, to Joe, to Joe. The lake is not among them. It has never been. Your Honor, the HOA's own founding document lists 11 common elements. The lake is not among them. It has never been. She held up a single sheet, Linda's voice transcribed from Tuesday. The president of the association, in a recorded conversation in my client's kitchen 6 days ago, referred to the disputed parcel as, quote, your lake, end quote. Spoken to my client. She held up a USB, a recording from executive session 11 months ago. The president, in her own voice, quote, Rayburn's deed might predate us. Dale says we have a path. We build, we use, we vote. By the time it gets to a judge, the resort is a fact. End quote. 3 board members assent. 1 objects on the record and is overruled. Linda's hand on the defense table had begun to shake. Marisol held up a printout. 43 contractor invoices, totaling $5,200,000, paid from a line item called Lake Amenity Improvement Capital Reserve. Every invoice for construction on the disputed parcel. She set the printout down. The doctrine of fixtures is older than this state. When a non-owner improves another's land, the improvement becomes the property of the landowner. The HOA has gifted my client a resort. We ask the court to recognize that gift on the record. She sat down. 8 minutes. Judge Alvarez took off her glasses. Mr. Whitlock. Anything? Dale did not stand. No, Your Honor. She ruled from the bench. Quiet title is Ku Iju Ijo, Iju 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 Ijo, in the 30-foot perimeter for the parcel described in the 1962 deed, including the lake bed, the shoreline, and the 30-foot perimeter. All improvements constructed on the parcel by the Lakeside Estates HOA are declared. Under the doctrine of fixtures, the property of the parcel owner, Thomas Rayburn, the HOA is ordered to cease all operations on the parcel within 7 days. I am separately referring the board's use of restricted resident funds to the Office of the State Attorney General for review. We're adjourned. The gavel hit at 10:01. 11 minutes had been Marisol's joke. The case itself, the part that mattered, had taken 7 words from the bench. Did your client build a 30,000 square foot resort? Yes. Then sit down. I did not stand up. I sat at the plaintiff's table and watched the courtroom empty around me. Linda did not move for a long time. She was still sitting at the defense table when the bailiff approached her gently to indicate she needed to leave. She stood up slowly, like a woman who had forgotten which leg went first. Dale guided her out by the elbow. They did not speak. Karen Lou came around the rail and stopped at our table. She had a thicker manila folder now. I want to talk to investigators. I have more. Marisol took the folder. Outside on the courthouse steps, a young woman from the regional paper asked me for a statement. I just wanted my lake back. They gave me more than I asked for. She wrote it down. I was about to leave when a man in a charcoal suit crossed the marble floor toward me. Second row of the gallery. I had not noticed him. He introduced himself by name and by title. Corporate development for an international hotel chain. He handed me his card. Mr. Rayburn, I would like to talk to you this week. About what? About the resort. He paused. About the lake. He paused again. Longer. About the deed. He had not come to buy a resort. He had come to buy a lake, a piece of land, a brand, and the legal certainty that nobody else could ever build on either side of it again. He asked if Wednesday worked. I told him Wednesday worked. By Wednesday afternoon, he had offered me a number with 10 figures. The deal closed 63 days after Judge Alvarez set down her gavel. The hotel chain's lawyers had been ready in 8. Mine had needed the rest of the time to walk through the structure, the lake, the surrounding parcel, the 30-foot perimeter, the resort improvements I now owned, and a perimeter development corridor on 3 sides of the water that the chain wanted as exclusive licensed brand territory for the next 50 years. They paid for the lake. They paid for the land. They paid for every nail Linda Vance had ever signed off on. They paid a separate brand licensing premium for a lakefront flagship they could put on every glossy magazine in every airport for half a century. The number on the closing document was $1.2 billion. I sat in a glass conference room in downtown Portland on a Tuesday morning with Marisol beside me, signed in 12 places, and watched the wire confirmation come through on a laptop, turned toward me by a woman in a navy suit. I felt almost nothing. I had not expected that. I had expected something relief, maybe, or vertigo. What I felt instead was the quiet of a man who had finally finished a job his father had asked him to finish and was setting his tools down at last. After capital gains and the trust, I had asked Marisol to set up for me a community foundation seeded with the majority of the proceeds, focused on land conservation, legal aid for homeowners, and a scholarship in my mother's name. My personal net came to a number with 9 figures. Enough that I would never have to think about money again. Not so much that I had to become someone I did not recognize in the mirror. I went home the same afternoon. I drove the long way, past the resort. The members-only banner was gone. So was the private event sign. So was Linda's Lakeside Estates community waterfront rededication, which had never been installed. In their place, on the front of the clubhouse, a discreet brass plaque carried the hotel chain's logo and the words Rayburn Lake Lodge. The chain had asked me what to name it. I had told them. The HOA was unrecognizable now. Within the 7 days Judge Alvarez had given them, the board had been ordered to cease all operations on the parcel. They had complied because they had no choice. By the end of week 2, the State Attorney General's office had opened a formal investigation into the use of resident funds, based largely on Karen Lou's manila folder, and the contractor invoices Eduardo Reyes had walked into my driveway. By the end of week 4, Dale Whitlock had surrendered his bar license to avoid a disciplinary hearing. By the end of week 6, Brent Vance was named in a separate civil action brought by 12 residents over 4 years of consulting fees nobody could justify. There was also the matter of the contractor. The general contractor on the resort build was still owed money. The HOA had paid $5.2 million of resident funds into the project, but 2 final progress payments totaling another $400,000 had been due the week the court order came down. The contractor was not going to be paid by me. I now owned the building, but I had never signed the contract. The contractor's only available counterparty was the HOA. The HOA had no resort to collect rent on. The residents discovered, over the course of an angry October, that their dues had funded the construction of a building they did not own, and that they were now on the hook for the final invoices anyway. Linda's gift to me had been generous. Her bill to her neighbors had been worse. The recall vote took place on a Tuesday evening in the community clubhouse, the original one, the one that had been built in 1989, before Linda was on any board. 326 residents voted. 312 voted to remove Linda Vance from the presidency of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. 14 voted no. I was not there. I was told about it the next morning by Mrs. Henderson, who had been elected to the new board the same night, along with Karen Lou and Tariq. The new board's first action was to dissolve the Lake Amenity Reserve line item entirely and to publish a full audit of HOA finances going back to 2018. The audit ran 97 pages. Most of the neighborhood read it. I will not pretend the neighborhood healed cleanly. Some people apologized. Greg Pulaski came to my porch one evening with a six-pack of good beer and said, simply, "Tom, I should have come to your door 3 years ago." I told him he was here now. We drank the beer. We did not talk about Linda. We talked about his grandchildren. Some people did not apologize. 2 of the 14 who had voted to keep Linda still cross the street when they see me at the mailbox. I let them. I have not lost anything by it. Linda Vance moved out of the neighborhood 8 months after the recall vote. I do not know where she went. I do not particularly want to know. I used a small portion of the proceeds, small for the size of the number, large for what it meant to set up a quiet trust that pays the annual property taxes for the 3 oldest residents on my street, including Mrs. Henderson, for as long as they live in their homes. None of them know it is from me. Marisol set it up under a generic name. Mrs. Henderson asked me once, with a small smile, if I had anything to do with the property tax abatement program that had appeared in her mailbox the prior spring. I told her I was glad she was getting some help. She did not press. I think she knew. I rebuilt the dock myself. I did it the way my father had built the original, 1 cedar board at a time. The same way he had taught me one summer when I was 17 and thought I was too old to be learning anything from him. I set the brass cleats in the wood by hand. The first one I set was the one that had sunk in the cove when the chainsaws came. A diver had brought it up for me. It was tarnished and pitted. But it was the one my father had set in 1973, and I set it in the same position on the new dock. I did the work over 6 weekends in the early fall. The morning the dock was finished, I made coffee, walked down the slope, and sat on the new boards at 7:14. The lake was still glass. The resort across the cove was open under its new name and new management. There was no banner. There was no string quartet. There were no security guards. The hotel chain ran a quiet, well-reviewed flagship that paid the surrounding community in jobs and tax base and stayed politely out of everybody's way. In a drawer in my father's old desk in the study, the laminated HOA membership application from Linda's white blazer morning sat next to a manila envelope the color of weak tea. The application was a souvenir. The envelope still held the original 1,962 deed, signed by my father in the Cascade Timber Company offices for $11,000 in cash. One was a relic of a brief and stupid season. The other was still in force, and would be in force long after I was gone. At the Western Cove, where my grandfather had set a cedar post in 1968, and where Mrs. Henderson's late husband had photographed a hand-painted sign in 1978, a new sign was standing. I had not put it up. Mrs. Henderson had. She had done it herself, with a small wooden mallet and a son-in-law's help. On the same weekend I had finished the dock. She had used the original 1,978 Polaroid as a reference. The lettering was the same. The cedar was the same. The post leaned at the same slight angle. Private Rayburn. I sat on my new dock at 7:14 and watched the morning light move across the water. I had not been afraid of Linda Vance on that morning 2 summers earlier. I had been tired. I had been grieving. I had been letting her be loud, because grief had told me to let her. I had a deed in a safe. I had a father who had taught me how to read it. I had a neighbor who had been keeping bylaws in a shoebox for 33 years. I had a lawyer who had loved my father. I had a lake. It had always been enough. The bobber dipped. I reeled my line in slowly, hand over hand. And, for the first morning in 3 years, the lake belonged to nobody but the man my father had left it to.